You know the drill. Hmm. Gonna be a good review today. It's gonna be a good review. Uh, Good Thursday morning. Hopefully you guys are staying wet. Hopefully you guys wasn't affected by the flood advisories and warnings that was passed overnight. Hopefully everybody's staying dry. Sorry for the late video today. Once school was on a delay, I helped hand out food, so I apologize for this video coming up late. Yeah, welcome to History by Phillips. I've been Mr. Phillips. This is going to be a review of the Federalist Era. In this lecture series, we talked about a couple of things. One, Washington coming to the presidency. Two, what he did in his or during his presidency, he set some precedents. We follow these precedents for a while. Examples is the president's only served 2 terms, and Washington chose to remain neutral when dealing with foreign affairs, meaning he doesn't want to get involved in permanent alliances. America will follow this for 100 years. America will be considered isolationist. Uh, Talk about how he dealt with the Whiskey Rebellion, uh, things of that sort, in his farewell address, and how he felt about political parties. He did not like the political parties, but he still had two form in his cabinet. One is under Alexander Hamilton. He would be the leader of the Federalists. The other person would be Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. He'd be the leader of the Democratic Republicans. But we'll get into it today's lecture. So first, a couple questions to keep in mind as we go through this. Why did Southern leaders demand a compromise over Hamilton? Yeah, there we go. I'm getting better with this. Plan to pay for the national debt. What was the compromise? Why were the Southerners upset? Remember, keep in mind the difference between a loose reading of the Constitution and a strict reading of the Constitution. And also think about how the tariffs would affect it and how the economies were different in the North and the South. That plays a role into it. So, what did they do to help keep these Southerners content? They moved something to somewhere. I'll give you that much. Explain causes. How did the actions of the 3 French agents lead to the major conflict over the powers of the federal government? The federal government and the rights of the states. So keep in mind, this happened under John Adams' presidency. There's 3 French agents. We named them to certain letters. They refer to as agent this, and agent this. Pretty much demanded bribe money from the United States. So France to stop attacking us. So so the Federalists are wanting to go to war. Federalists don't like this, but John Adams, he does something else and upsets his party. Remember the analogy I use? I'd be like Donald Trump all of a sudden banned guns. What did he do to upset the Federalist Party? And also summarizing, how effective was John Adams in the presidency, uh, addressing the challenges? How effective was John Adams in addressing the challenges of the presidency? Remember John Adams' presidency? He was the second president, kind of handpicked by George Washington. Wasn't sorry about that. Wasn't that good. Also, keep in mind what George Washington said about political parties. You kind of lose your voice and you put the party before the people. Classic example from the last debate. Uh, these folks defended their party so much, but not too much by each other. They would start arguing. It's famous here. Trump, obviously, when he debates, he likes to talk over folks. And Biden, he was trying to do some mudslinging too. We'll be talking about mudslinging, especially when we talk about the 1824 and 1828 elections coming up here in about 2 or 3 weeks. Uh, oh yeah, I want to mention this. It's the centennial anniversary of the 19th Amendment. In case you don't know, the 19th Amendment very much allowed the women the right to vote in this country. So we'll be celebrating that for the 100 years. So that's a good thing to celebrate. I know that might seem like a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, that is nothing at all. So let's take time to celebrate this little fact. Yeah, Tennessee was a big part or integral part in this becoming an amendment. That was the last state to ratify this. Since that, when Tennessee ratified this, it gave these enough number of states to actually make this an amendment. So yeah, Tennessee was integral in this. Uh, yeah, women's been able to vote for 100 years now. Why does my thing keep moving? My apologies. But we're going to review the Federalist era first. We're going to talk about the first president, George Washington, what he did during his presidency, his early challenges, and last but not least, we'll be talking about the emergence of the political party. So let's get into it. So the first president, you need to know, he establishes the cabinet. We talked about the cabinet. The president doesn't know everything. He needs experts to advise him on things he probably might not know anything about. Example, I use Donald Trump. I put something in Google Classroom about why is it important to have a cabinet, and I can show you a picture of the uh, current cabinet. It's not current, but it's close enough. It gives you an idea of different kind of departments advise the president. But the cabinet is an integral part of the executive branch. The first part of the cabinet that gets set up. Obviously, you got George Washington here. You have Henry Knox. He'll be your Secretary of War. That department doesn't exist anymore. It kind of got evolved into the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security. But you'd have Henry Knox for the Department of War. This important fellow right here, Alexander Hamilton. He'll be the Secretary of Treasury. He'll be the one who found the National Bank. Remember, Thomas Jefferson, Democrat Republicans don't like that. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Also, you got Thomas Jefferson nominated, or he becomes the Secretary of State. His job is to deal with foreign relations. He said he's pretty much has to talk to Britain, France, Spain, all sorts of countries. Then you got Edmund Randolph. He's pretty much the people's lawyer. He's there to make sure that all these decisions these guys are making are fair for the citizens in a legal sense. Uh, he also passes the Judiciary Act of 1789. You need to write that down. What you need to know about that is establishes the federal courts and the state courts. That's what you need to know about the Judiciary Act of 1789. It establishes the federal court, Supreme Court, then the state courts. So each of the states have their own courts. Also, the first national bank gets established under George Washington. Uh, they argued that this was an implied power. It doesn't actually say in the Constitution that Congress or the government can establish a bank, but it was implied. The analogy I like to use is when you get your driver's license. It's implied that you're not going to drive on the left side of the road, that you'll stop at red lights, that you're not going to do 100 miles an hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. It's understood that you're going this. You don't have to be expressly explicitly told this. Also, George Washington is known as president. It sounds like president, but presidents it's pretty much standards. He served 2 terms, stepped down. Uh, he be neutral in his relations with other countries, meaning he doesn't get take sides. Just lets it play out. This will be pretty much the foundations of the American government for the next 100 years. They followed George Washington's example, so that's why it's important to know his precedent. So let's focus on one big thing in his presidency. Let's talk about the economy. The tariffs. Were they good? Were they bad? So keep in mind, we kind of have 2 different economies going on here in the United States. Up north, it's based on industry and banking. They got the factories, they got the textiles, and they're starting to mess with. You think of them as stocks and investments. That's what they're making their money on. While the South, they're relying on farming. They're an agrarian economy. Pretty much a bunch of farmers. So they don't have much industry. They don't have like the factories and the big cities and stuff like that. They have a lot of farmland. So these tariffs, they were to increase the price of British goods because they were selling them cheaper here in America. But if you increase the British goods, increase the price of the British goods, all of a sudden they are more expensive than the American goods. So the American citizens, they'll prefer to buy American goods because they're cheaper. Well, they're buying these American goods. Well, the area of the country that benefits from this the most is the North, because once again, their economy is based on industry. They are making these things in those factories, in those textiles mills. While on the other hand, where the South did not invest in industry as much as agrarian economy, the farming, they're having to pay more for these products while they're pretty much watching the North get rich while they're kind of staying stagnant. They're having to pay more for what they used to, and the North is benefiting from it. They are getting upset about this. So to keep them satisfied, they moved the capital from the north to its current location, Washington D.C. That's the capital with the O, the nation's capital. Typically, you move the capital closer to the south, the more influential that area can be, so on and so forth. There's a lot of reasons why it's good to have the capital closer to your area. So this would appease the Southerners for a little while. Can the government create the national bank? So early 1790s, Alexander Hamilton, Washington's like, hey, we need a national bank. We can't rely on taxes and all this stuff to pay off these wars. Well, if we have an emergency like a tornado, wildfire, economic depression, we need to be able to have a money supply on hand so we can fix these problems immediately because the world turns on money. Just Fact of life. Money does everything. Uh, but the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, argued that the government cannot do this. They're violating one of the principles, a limited government. Where in the Constitution does it say you can do this? George Washington and Alexander Hamilton will argue it's implied. It makes sense. Why can you not see this as a good idea? This is where we start seeing these political parties start forming in George Washington's cabinet. But that was what he first came to presidency. Let's look at what he actually, George Washington, did during his presidency. Early challenges. We talked about the Whiskey Rebellion, how it was very similar to the Bacon Rebellion, same area, western Pennsylvania. But this time he was able to use the federal army, the U.S. Army, instead of having to rely on militias. Because remember, during Bacon's Rebellion, the government was operating under the Articles of Confederation. Hopefully, you know by now that the Articles of Confederation was ineffective. Didn't pretty much have authorization to do anything. Too many rules. Not clear on what the rules are, what we're supposed to do. On the other hand, you have the U.S. Constitution. George Washington is commander in chief. He is the head of the military, no matter what. Above the generals, that's the job of the presidency. President, he's the head of the military. So he's able to use the military, go into western Pennsylvania to stop this whiskey rebellion in its tracks. Remember, this is all over taxes again. Taxes will be a hot topic, as like slavery for the rest of the survey. We talked about the Treaty of Greenville. Remember, we had problems in the West. When I refer to the West, I pretty much mean Western Appalachia, a little bit of Ohio and the Northwest Territory, the Ohio River Valley and the Northwest Territory. Basically, George Washington won't look weak with these other nations looking at us, like Britain and France. Uh, and they know they're supplying these Indians to help resist and harass the American settlers. Uh, so he didn't want to look weak. So he sends an army to help stop these folks. It's St. Clair, Indiana, I do believe. In an upset, Native Americans were able to defeat the U.S. Army. Kind of a black eye on us, kind of embarrassing. So George Washington hears about this, and he's not fooling around anymore. He sends a good portion of the U.S. Army to stop this Indian rebellion, if you want to call it that, uh, in northern Ohio, modern day northern Ohio. Uh, they ended up defeating the Indians there at a place called Fallen Timbers. After that defeat, they would force, that's the key word here, force the Indians to sign a treaty. That treaty is called the Treaty of Greenville, 1795. Basically, from this treaty, we would get the modern day state of Ohio. His foreign affairs, once again, I try to say, George Washington wants to remain neutral. He does not want to take sides one way or another, and particularly with France and Britain. Pretty much the American public is split on both countries. Some like France, some hate France, some like Britain, some hate Britain, so on and so forth. And in his farewell address, he talked about the dangers of political parties. He said, "Don't form political parties." Well, that's just a summary of it, but he called them factions. But these political parties will still emerge, and we see that in his cabinet. Sorry, so foreign affairs. Like I said, some like the French, some didn't. Some like the British, some didn't. The French Revolution's going on. They stormed the Bastille. They take out the royal family. They execute King Louis and his family, so on and so forth. This shocked the Americans. Some of them. They thought, "Oh man, this is very brutal. This is oh man, scary." Typically, the South favored the French Revolution. They was like, "Hey, freedom, liberty, woo! Get rid of the monarchy." While the North, they was poor, like, oh man, that's brutal. That's too much. You start seeing the division there. Also, Britain's making us mad again. They're still kind of sour after the American Revolution. They are capturing American ships and forcing these American sailors into the British Navy. They basically would capture them like, hey, you deserted from the Navy, get back in the Navy. Uh, Forced them against their will. To help remedy this, Jay's Treaty was passed. So John Jay, he became the first Chief Justice of the United States, leader of the Supreme Court. He was sent to negotiate with Britain. Terrible negotiation, but something was signed that's supposed to bring us peace. Peace. It just thinks. Pick these treaties. So Spain sees how we're dealing with France and Britain over here in the Ohio River Valley, Northwest Territory. They don't want to be bullied out of the North Americas as well. So to kind of save face, to stay in the good graces of the Americans, they signed the Picnics Treaty. So basically, the Picnics Treaty gives us the modern day Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Along with that, we get access to the Mississippi River and New Orleans. That is the important one. New Orleans is a very important harbor. Boston's very good up there in New England. It's got good access to Europe. But New Orleans, it has access to these Latin American countries. And in these Latin American countries, they are producing cash crops like indigo, sugarcane, spices, rum, you name it. It's a hot commodity down there. Also, with the slave trade, uh, it's a busy harbor. It makes a lot of money. So Americans have access to New Orleans. We're making money. But the big thing to keep in mind is George Washington remains neutral. He's not taking sides. He thought having permanent alliances, permanent friendships was a bad idea, so on and so forth. But just know he remains neutral. That's the big one to keep in mind. He remains neutral. Lastly, we talked about the first political parties. We talked about how George Washington liked that. He's pretty much saying the individual loses its voice and the party takes precedent. You kind of see that in today, especially with the Senate vote of the new Supreme Court justice with Amy Barrett. All 52 Republicans say yes, all 48 Democrats say no. I argue you can't tell me that there wasn't one Republican that wanted to say no, and you can't tell me there was one or Democrat that wanted to say yes. But they have to remain loyal to the party, or they'll be ostracized or kind of shoved to the side to the gutter, ignored. Uh, but we'll start seeing the emergence of the political party. You have Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists, Alexander Hamilton and John Adams leading for the Federalists, and Thomas Jefferson leading for the Democratic Republicans. This will bring us into the election of 1796. George Washington served both his terms. He's stepping down, so we need a new president. Obviously, the person George Washington picks is going to be his vice president, John Adams, safe pick. Usually, the president will serve. Then once he's done, the vice president will run, and hopefully, ideally, he'll serve, so on and so forth. But the Democrat Republicans, they nominate Thomas Jefferson. Now, remember, in this election, each party had to nominate two people. So on the ballot, you have four folks. Everybody had to vote for two. The winner was the president. Second place was vice president. If these same rules still applied in 2016, you would have Donald Trump as president and Hillary Clinton as vice president. As terrible as that sounds, they wouldn't work together. They don't like each other. Yada yada yada. As terrible as that sounds, that's kind of pretty much how terrible it was back then. It's just hard to get along when you have different political ideologies. Hard. Thomas Jefferson tried to stay political, but he would heavily criticize John Adams, mostly because he disliked the power of the central government. He was more for a limited government, or the states having more say than they do. We also talked about John Adams' presidency and how it was just kind of a dud. It was just a dud. Real quick, his presidency. We talked about the XYZ affair. Remember, we was trying to negotiate with France. They don't like us at the time because of Jay's Treaty, so they started taking American boats. France is upset. It's like, hey, we help you win the American Revolutionary War. Why are you helping Britain out? We're at war with Britain. Why would you seek peace with them? So they get mad, upset about that. And they start taking American boats. So we go over there trying to negotiate with France, try to smooth things over, try to seek peace. Instead, they send three agents who remain nameless for confidentiality reasons. We go, that's a different subject, but yada, yada, yada. But pretty much three agents. These agents are referred to as Agent X, Agent Y, and Agent Z. They are basically demanding bribe money. We call that a tribute. They're saying, hey, you're going to give us a bunch of money or we're going to keep attacking your boats. John Adams gets word of this back in America. He's angry. This makes the Federalist Party angry. France! They don't like it. So they're wanting to go to war. Because keep in mind, the Federalists tended to favor Britain because of monetary reasons, while the Southerners or the Democratic Republicans favored France because they thought the French Revolution was a good thing, so on and so forth. But anyway, because of the XYZ affair, there's a lot of folks that are not liking France right now. So John Adams passes the Alien and Sedition Acts. Basically, the Alien and the Alien Enemies Act. It allowed the president to put in prison or deport whoever he deemed a threat. This could be anybody that had French sympathies. They thought the French cause was good, French descent, so on and so forth. He starts locking these folks up. And the Sedition Act, this is pretty much a stark violation of the First Amendment. He starts shutting down Democratic and Republican newspapers because he made it law that you couldn't criticize the government. Stark violation of the First Amendment. You can't shut down the press. We have the freedom of speech, or we have the right to express our ideas, so get our ideas out there. That's why newspapers are a very integral part of this time period. It's like Twitter of the time, the Instagram, your TikTok, whatever. This is how people got their information. Uh, so the states fight back on these laws. This is where these states they start flexing their power. Federalism working here. So you have the federal government. They passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. But then you have two states, Virginia and Kentucky, in 1798 and 1799. They passed some resolutions. The big thing about these resolutions is that they nullify, exit out, they nullify the Alien and Sedition Acts in their state. So basically, they're saying, all right, John Adams, you can make this law, but us here in Kentucky, us here in Virginia, we're not going to enforce it. What are you going to do about it? You can't make us enforce it. What are you going to do? You'll have to come down here yourself and enforce this law because as us Kentuckians, us Virginians, we're not going to enforce it. We nullify this. Just bleh, we're not going to do nothing about it. So this is where you see the states fighting back. The Democratic Republicans love this because they favor a limited government, or where the states should have more say in how to rule the region. This is what the Democratic Republicans are loving. Also, John Adams ruins the Federalist Party. So remember the XYZ affair. This is making everybody, especially Federalists, they're wanting to go to war with France. Uh, but John Adams finds himself as presidency. He can't just make the Federalists. He has to try to make the nation as a whole happy. That is the tricky part about being president. No matter what, somebody's going to hate you. They're going to criticize you for whatever you do. Well, John Adams, he figured he'd try to appease some people by trying to seek peace with the French. This just upsets the Federalist Party. That'd be like if today Donald Trump passed a law banning all guns. Now, typically Republicans favor guns; they love them, like to own them, so on and so forth. This would be like Donald Trump passed the law banning guns. All the Republicans conservatives about, what are you doing? You've gone loony. Same reaction with John Adams when he's trying to seek peace with France. He's like, what are you doing? They threatened us. We need to go to war. The Federalist Party, they start bickering amongst themselves, and it would just fall apart. This would set up Thomas Jefferson and the Democrat Republicans to win the election of the 1800s. That will kick off what we like to call in American history the Jeffersonian era. The Get tongue tied here, this hillbilly. I know I gotta work on my enunciation, but see how much time we got on here. Ooh, 23 minutes, not too bad. But yeah, this was set up because of John Adams' presidency and just the falling apart of the Federalist Party. Thomas Jefferson would end up winning the election of the 1800s. We will look at that here in about 2 weeks. But basically, to recap, George Washington, he becomes presidency. He sets the example. He sets precedents. People follow them to this day. Only served 2 terms. He would remain neutral. He'd also pass the Judiciary Act of 1789, establishes the Supreme and state courts. He also showed how effective the Constitution was compared to the Articles of Confederation. You can see this with the Whiskey Rebellion, so on and so forth. And his farewell, George Washington, everybody loved this man. Apparently, it was a very emotional time when he stepped down. Apparently, every man hugged and shook his hand, thanked him, so on and so forth. But George Washington, he was warning against the emergence of political parties. He was seeing this form in his cabinet. But either way, the political parties formed, and they're still here to this day in one way or another. Not so much the Federalist or ideology stayed, but political parties as an idea, as a concept, are still here. But basically, the two political parties that were formed, one would be led by Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. They'd be Federalists. They favored a strong central government. They love the tariffs. They think that's increased American business. Navy, we don't really talk about the Navy. Like the business, they think their economy is based on industry, based on banking. Uh, they had a lot of support up in the New England area, up north, and they believed in a loose interpretation of the Constitution, meaning they have implied powers. That's the argument they used so they could create the national bank. Meanwhile, you got Thomas Jefferson and Democratic Republicans. We'll also be talking about President Madison. He'll start becoming a big player here soon. Basically, they favor state rights. They think the states should have more say in how they govern their area. So they like a weak central government. We call it a limited government. Right here, Republicans favor a limited government. So typically, if you see a strong central government, the pretty much opposite of that is a limited government. They favored the state banks over the national bank. They thought states can run the area better. Oh yeah, and they also favored more folks being able to vote. They think the voting rights should be expanded to more folks, while the Federalists think only the I won't say upper class, but the well-to-do and educated should be the ones to vote. Because what I mean, this guy with a second grade education can't read or write. What does he truly know about politics? That would be their argument. So on and so forth. But that is it. That is it for the Federalist era. I've been Mr. Phillips. This has been History by Phillips. Make sure, hey, my students, make sure you're logging into Google Classroom. We will have study block today. It'll be a quick one. Try to stay dry. Till next time. Take care. Let me see if I get it. Yep. Till next time, take care, and I'll see y'all study block. Peace.